Scottsdale Artbeat.
Scottsdale Artbeat.
Scottsdale Artbeat.
Scottsdale Artbeat. Cool, Daddy.
Welcome to Scottsdale Artbeat. I'm your host, Diane Bykowski, and today's program will literally and figuratively take you out of this world. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong opened the hatch of the lunar lander Eagle and immortalized the phrase, "One giant step for man, one giant leap for mankind." But it's my guest today who immortalized America's space program in his art, artist and illustrator Robert McCall. But his art goes far beyond that. Let's meet the man behind the space program, the real space program, Robert McCall. Welcome to Scottsdale Artbeat, Robert.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
It's so nice to have you with us. Tell us a bit about how you started to draw the very first time.
Well, it started many, many years ago, as you can tell.
I think you look great.
But really, when I was a young child, I started to draw, and I drew a lot.
Did you like airplanes right from the start?
Well, airplanes never occurred to me when I was 7 and 8 years old. But I certainly did like airplanes early on. And so soon after that time frame, I became aware of aircraft, and I lived near Dayton, Ohio, where the Wright brothers discovered and flew their fragile aircraft so many years ago. And my aunt knew the Wright brothers.
Oh my.
So that connection was interesting. But no, I saw a lot of aircraft in the sky, being close to Dayton, the old biplanes, and of course we're talking about the early 30s now. And I came to be very fascinated with aviation because of these aircraft that flew very low. They had sham battles. They called them sham battles.
What's that?
It's a playing at war.
Okay.
And so they maneuvered in the sky, and these were the old biplanes that were fabric covered. Their wings were fabric covered, early aircraft. But I was close to it, saw a lot of it, fell in love with aviation and the vehicles that carried men into the sky.
And you became a professional artist at what age?
17.
Oh my.
That is, I started making a living. And actually, in some ways, did just that. Because
and what were you painting then?
I worked for a sign shop in Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up. And this sign shop did posters for the streetcars and for the trucks. They'd have big posters about the columnists of the newspapers and so forth. And I would paint the pictures that were then printed and were to be seen on these trucks and on the streetcars. And I was very proud to be doing this work at that early age.
Of course. And where did you progress next as far as your art career?
Well, I was going to art school at the time that I was 17 and graduated from high school and went into the Columbus College of Art and Design on a scholarship. Big thrill to win that scholarship, and so I had 2 years of training in this wonderful school, which still exists. Indeed, recently, I was the commencement speaker for 2 years, not 2 years running, but 2 times I've done that. And then they also gave me an honorary doctorate.
How
all
wonderful.
These many, many years later.
Wow, to go back to your alma mater that way.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
And when you were there, did you have a particular mentor?
My mentors were the great artists that inspired me.
Okay.
And I certainly had a teacher in high school that was a mentor, and a teacher in junior high, or it was an elementary school, that saw in my work and my industry, because I was very focused, something, and encouraged me. And so they were my mentors.
Being an educator myself, that means a lot to me
Oh,
too,
yeah.
to hear that.
Oh, yeah.
That teachers really do inspire their
They
students.
do in a major way.
Now, you enlisted in World War II. Did you do any art during the war?
I did, I certainly did, for the training department. I was graduated as a bombardier and was made a second lieutenant. But instead of shipping me off to a crew, they kept me at the Kirtland Field in Albuquerque, and I remained there for about 6 months as an artist doing work that had to do with training aides.
Now, when you when you enlisted, you had to take your physical, and you found out something kind of interesting that you had.
Yes, I did, and it disqualified me from flying.
And that's what you really wanted.
I wanted to fly airplanes. And when I was going through classification, this was Santa Ana, California, I discovered, or they discovered, that I was colorblind. And I had been an illustrator already working in Chicago. And I'm now about 21 years old. And I discovered that I was colorblind, and that disqualified me. Now, it did not disqualify me for further training as a crew member.
And why is that?
And, well, because it was the pilot that had to have the perfect color vision.
Okay.
The bombardier did not need that kind of color vision. So I became a bombardier.
Now, the bombardier, aren't you sitting in one of those domed kind of glass enclosures?
In the nose of the aircraft, this
Okay.
crystal dome that surrounded me, this crystal nose of the aircraft. And you know, I felt that I had the best seat in the house. When we took off and landed, that's where I was. And of course, I flew long distances in that nose. And I liked it because the spectacle of the sky and the clouds and the universe.
And I believe that's probably why you paint the way you do now.
I'm
because
sure it
you
had an
those
influence.
visions right then and
I
there.
saw these spectacular scenes from
Did you
that
want to
location.
pull out your paintbrush and
Well,
just start
I did.
right?
I had my watercolors and so forth with me when I was in the Air Force. I had my portfolio. And I would carry it from place to place.
It's probably a good thing you weren't the pilot.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And it was just as well. And by the way, I must say, I wasn't devastated not being a pilot. My fascination was with flight.
Okay.
And I was flying. I was up there. Other people had the responsibility of flying that aircraft. I could concentrate on the beauty.
And after the war ended, then what happened in your art career?
Well, after the war, during the war, right at the end of it, I met Louise. And she was an art student at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And I was at Kirtland Field in Albuquerque training. And I met this fabulous girl, 19 years old, an art major at the university.
A match made in heaven.
And right. And since I was a permanent teacher there at the airfield, I lived off the base in the home of the Dean of Fine Arts.
Oh my.
So I was in
It
the right
just happened
place,
at
and
the
she
right
was at a
time.
party there, and I met her, and we fell in love immediately. And she was 19, I was about 24 at the time, and I had never met anybody like this. She was talented, but she was funny, and she was delightful to be with. So that happened, and by the way, this day, today,
July 20th.
July 20th, when we're taping this, is our 62nd anniversary.
Wow,
And we're celebrating that.
congratulations. So
Thank
we
you.
have a pre-celebration right now with our taping. And July 20th was also the day that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon.
How about that? And that happened, of course, long after we were married, but we
He chose
thought
that day
we thought that
intentionally.
was prophetic and very special. And the fact that we live in a home that's on Moonlight Way is another signal or sign
Absolutely.
that this marriage had to be special.
And
and
it
we've
is.
always felt that.
That's wonderful. Now, in 1949, you moved to New York.
Yep.
What caused that move?
Because I felt that I had to be in Manhattan. It's the fountainhead of publishing in this country. It's where the greatest concentration of talent gathers. It's where I had the best chance of working on the most significant special work. And I wanted to go there. Life magazine is published there, the Saturday Evening Post in Philadelphia, but a lot of the work comes out of New York. So, and I work for those publications. So I just felt that that's where I had to be. And I wanted to be rubbing shoulders with great artists, great illustrators. And I had that as a prerequisite for my career. And so we did. We moved there.
There's an organization of illustrators as well.
The Society of Illustrators, yes.
Are you part of that organization?
Have been for many, many decades. And in I think it was 88, I was inducted into the Hall of Fame and of that organization, which is the preeminent organization of artists and illustrators in the world.
Do you think being part of an organization such as that has prompted your career as well?
I think it was very beneficial because you meet other artists, you have lunch with them, you get acquainted, you find what other artists are striving to do, and it's a very competitive world, like all creative endeavors. But it was stimulating and a wonderful place to be.
So would you advise young aspiring artists, emerging artists to be part of groups like that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think you can become too secluded as an artist because it's a very singular kind of enterprise, painting pictures. You're all alone. You need a mentor. You need a companion and a friend.
And luckily
like
you have another artist who is also part of your
And that's
life.
beneficial too, because I have somebody who I can look to and learn from, and who can look at my work and help me.
And you collaborate on a number of things together,
Yeah,
too.
we have.
How wonderful. Now, how did you get involved in NASA's program and their art program there?
I was working for Life magazine on some various projects that had to do with the future. And at that time, we were building toward our space program, and I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to see as much of it as possible. I wanted to meet the astronauts. I wanted to be as intimately involved as was practicable. And I made every effort to make that happen. Furthermore, NASA, our National Air and Space Society, wanted a program where they invited artists to witness space events and then paint pictures.
Okay.
And I was among those chosen to do that, and there have been many through the years. And as a result, NASA and the space program has a huge collection of very fine art documenting these various events, and they've sent astronauts all over the world. And
Probably the one that I'm most, well, I'm not familiar with it, that I could tell you exactly what's on it. However, I remember being at the Smithsonian and seeing your fabulous mural that's there. And I think a number of people are probably acquainted with it, if not seeing it live in a photograph of some type. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about that project?
Oh, well, getting that opportunity to paint this huge mural.
And how huge is it?
Well, it's 68 feet from bottom to top. That's 6 stories, if you want to translate it into stories, 10 feet a story. And it is 2,800 feet of canvas, square feet of canvas.
2,800 feet of canvas.
Yeah. And it's, so it's a lot of canvas area to cover. And it was this area of the entryway into the Smithsonian that they wanted a mural. And they wanted a mural that celebrated our achievement of landing on the moon. Well, there was nothing I could think of that I would rather do. And so I designed that, and it was approved, and I made the painting and spent about 8 months in Washington. We rented a house. Louise was with me. And we lived there, met a lot of fascinating people,
I'm sure
as you might
did.
guess. Lived in Georgetown. And every day I'd work at the Smithsonian. And by the way, the building had not opened to the public.
Okay.
It opened on July the 4th of 1976, and I arrived in 75 to make the painting. I worked on a scaffold that was 9 stories high. with a stairway that allowed me to go up to these 9 different levels.
And did you have a smaller painting with you that you
I had
used
the
as
master study that I did in this very studio.
Wow. And the master study, how do you go about doing something like that? What do you do?
Well, first I make even smaller sketches and develop my ideas that have to do with content and color and subject matter and how I'm going to compose it and how it's going to look. I made a little 3-dimensional model using little wax figures, clay figures that were the appropriate size of humans, and then photographed that. And with my miniature painting in the background, I've got slides that show all of that. But I did a very thorough study of the area in which, on which this would be painted. And then when I finished the master study, it was okayed, and then at the proper time I arrived in Washington with Louise, and we'd rented this house and we lived there. And
so the entire process from the miniatures to the very end probably was over a year, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was about probably a year and a half of involvement. Yeah, and maybe more, because there was a lot of thought that went into it before I got around to doing the work. So it was a unique and special assignment, one that I regard as one of the most significant in my career.
That was going to be my next question. What would be your most significant?
Yeah, I think maybe that one. Another one that was very special was working with Stanley Kubrick on 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Tell us a little about your involvement in the movie industry.
Yeah, well, that was the major involvement. Now let's see, the sequence. I had done something for the movie business before that. And then I did Tora, Tora, Tora for 20th Century Fox, went to Japan, watched the filming, went to Hawaii where some of the filming was done. And this is a classic film. Every December the 7th, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, this film is shown on television, and I often watch it for the
Bring back memories.
30th, yeah, it brings back memories, because I can remember being in a certain spot when a certain scene was filmed.
And what did you do as an artist? What was your role in it?
Drew, took a lot of my own photographs, and spent a lot of time on the sets, which were spectacular, by the way.
I'm sure.
I mean, in Japan, they built a half of the aircraft carrier that was a dominant part of the film. They built the whole, from stem to stern, of one of the Congo-class battleships. It was built on pilings. The bow was in the water, the inland sea in Japan. The aft end was in the woods, but it was full scale. And they had some real guns on these replicas. And it was fascinating and hundreds of extras, handsome young Japanese boys, and they'd come in early in the morning and go through the wardrobe buildings and get their uniforms and their outfits. What an experience that was. And
now, was Louise with you there as well?
No, she was not with me in Japan or Hawaii. And I wish she had been, but she wasn't. And the pyrotechnics was fascinating too, to see how they create these explosions and the fires, and being as close to it as the cameras were. It was very...
Now, you were sketching, and what were they going to use these sketches for?
Oh, I was going to use it for a series of paintings.
Okay.
And then I made that series of paintings when I got back to my studio. At that time, it was in Chappaqua, New York. Actually, the studio was in a barn in Yorktown Heights, but we lived in Chappaqua. And we lived there for many years when I was working in Manhattan.
And this series, once it was finished, let's say the series for Tora, 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 what happened to that series?
Well, we had a big show at Lincoln Center in the Museum of Performing Arts, an elegant place and a prestigious place to have a show. And there were big banners out in front of that facility announcing the on-the-spot paintings of Robert McCall for the film Tora, 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 which had not been released yet. But then it was released during the course of that 6-month exhibition. I did 26 paintings that were part of that show.
And how long did that series take you to complete?
About about 8 months, I would guess, and finished the last one just in time to get it hung at Lincoln Center. And that was the last one, by the way, that's hanging on the wall.
And I think we'll get to look at that one a little bit later,
Yeah.
and you could talk
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Great. How was it working with Stanley Kubrick?
It was a delight. I flew over there for just 2 days, went to his home, met his wife, by the way, he had an old Rolls Royce. It was old even then.
Oh.
It was a kind of a classic antique. But he lived elegantly, as you might expect. He was very successful already, and a fascinating person. He interviewed me at the studio at Borehamwood Wood, and he urged me. He wanted me to come over and do the posters, and there were 4 paintings that I made for him and that film, just 4. But in the 4, about 5 months we were there. And by the way, I went back home then and brought Louise with me, and we were living there in London together near Buckingham Palace in a lovely apartment, and it was just an ideal kind of an assignment that I was totally wrapped up in, as you might guess.
I can see the passion that you have for it even now, and it's
Yeah.
been years later.
Yeah, oh, that's what it takes, by the way, a lot of passion, a lot of commitment and energy, a lot of energy. And passion.
Now, are there ever any commissions that you get or requests that you say, oh, I don't really want to do that?
If I feel that way in the beginning, by the time I start working on them, the passion seems to flow.
Because then some of your energy just gets involved in it.
Yeah, I get involved, and there have been projects, not many, not certainly in the last many decades. In the early years, there were. Then I had the passion because I wanted to do anything anybody wanted me to do.
And felt honored that they
Yeah,
asked,
right.
And
Felt
now
lucky.
you can pick and choose.
Yeah, and now I pick and choose, and so I don't really get involved in things that don't intrigue me. I'm currently working on a project that has all the passion flowing and all of the excitement and possibilities, and I want to make great paintings, and that's my goal.
Well, all of your paintings have such movement in them, and they have passion, and they have excitement.
I hope
and
so.
I can see part of your personality in all of them. You were involved in some postage stamps. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, when I was still in New York, so this would have been, I think the first stamps I did were done in the early 70s. Yeah, the first one was in 71, I think, published. And I was asked by the U.S. Postal Service and the people that advise them on who to choose and call to design a stamp for a forthcoming space mission, celebrating our use of the lunar rover, the first time it was used, and it was going to be a double stamp, which made it all the more intriguing. At that time, I had never designed a stamp, but I did design that one. It was taken to the moon.
That's the one was canceled on the moon.
Yeah, a copy of it was canceled on an envelope that had been prepared, and it was canceled by David Scott, the astronaut, the commander of that particular Apollo 15 mission, and on worldwide television. So when it was canceled on the moon by David Scott, and he had a little kit that he took out of the lunar rover that had been prepared, fireproof and all of the necessary qualities that would make it a safe item to carry, and it didn't weigh very much, and he opened it up and he had a stamp, and then on worldwide television, he canceled that stamp, and it was my stamp.
Oh.
And I was in mission control.
I was going to ask, were you there?
Yeah, well, yeah, I was in mission control in Houston when that occurred. So, and then not only that, but I was allowed, because I was I was often in mission control during some of those landings, and I'd become acquainted with the guys sitting at the consoles and the men in charge, like Chris Kraft, who was a famous name in those days. And he said, "Bob, you wanna manipulate that camera on the moon?" And I said, "I sure do." And so I sat in front of a console with the television, and I had the controls here, and I would move the control forward, and the camera on the moon, mounted on the lunar rover, would tilt down, and I could swivel it right and left.
So you were in control.
And I could zoom in and zoom out. And there was a delay, however, from the time I made that movement and the time that I saw it come back on the big screen at Mission Control.
Could you say that was probably one of your fondest moments
Oh,
where
yeah.
you had that control?
It really was.
What about the patches that the astronauts wear? I think you have some involvement in that as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, early on, I was invited. I guess the first patch that I designed was the one for Gene Cernan and the last mission to the moon. And I had become acquainted with Gene, and he asked me if I would design a mission emblem for that mission. And every mission has its own mission emblem. I've designed about 10. This was the first, and it happened to be the very last mission to the moon, and remains. The last time a human being was on the moon, it was Gene Cernan who stepped back into the command module, and the lunar lander, and blasted off to return to the Earth. And he's a good friend. He's been here a number of times in my home, and so I designed his mission emblem. Then there were others, many others. The first shuttle mission was my mission emblem. I did that for John Young, and he's going to be spending the night here soon for some kind of an occasion that's occurring. But it's all been fascinating.
Do many of the astronauts own any of your paintings?
There are some that do. Not a lot, but there probably are more that have posters or something like that I've done.
Bob, artists often paint in a series, and you mentioned you have a number of series as well. Could you tell us a little bit about your Floating City series?
Oh, I'd love to. Actually, it's the major series that I've ever developed.
Is the one behind us part of that series?
Yes. We were driving home from Tucson, having just arrived in Phoenix and in Arizona, and I was marveling at the beautiful white clouds that looked like cities in the sky. And these particular clouds had flat bottoms, and then all of this wonderful texture and architecture above. And I could just imagine turning those in a painting into a city or some kind of a complex in the sky.
What was your first one? Do you remember?
I do indeed. As a matter of fact, it's still part of my collection. And it's a fairly large painting. It's been reproduced many, many times. And it is a big floating concept, maybe 1,000 feet or maybe only 500 feet off of the desert. So it's not out in space, mind you, and it's not flying at a fast speed, it's maybe just hovering. It has that capability. It's a technology that doesn't exist, of course. But following that successful landing on the moon, I was so impressed with humanity's ability to focus on a problem or a desire and making it happen. And it seemed to me anything that we wanted to do seemed to be possible. And so I made that first painting and was kind of thrilled by the result. It's a landscape, it's a desert landscape with saguaro cactus in the foreground and this awesome, enormous object in the sky with little skylights and with little windows and with a dome, a crystal dome, and a craft launching out of the top of it. It could have been a transportation center of the distant future. Maybe this is where you go to catch the ship to the moon.
And what's the title of that one? Do you remember? Or no?
Yeah, it is. It's AD 3000.
Okay. One of my favorites is Within Our Reach.
Oh,
I
yeah.
just love that
Oh,
one.
I'm glad you do.
That's my favorite.
And that was done for Honeywell.
Oh, okay.
Honeywell was my client. They wanted a painting and they wanted visionary. And so I was free to do this painting, which you comment on, which is a futuristic scene that could not exist anywhere. But nonetheless, it said Arizona, it said the future, it said bizarre and strange craft in the sky.
And I think that's why I loved it
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Now, you have a number of shows in the Valley as well.
I've had many through the years.
At
yes.
the West Valley Art Museum, at the Phippen Museum up in Prescott.
Yeah,
Just recently you had one at Northern Trust Bank
that's right.
in Scottsdale.
Yeah. And I'm having one in October that starts in October at the Paradise Valley City Hall.
And will that be in collaboration with your wife Louise, or is this a
No,
solo
she's
show?
going to have one of her own a year later, but this will be up for a long time. It'll be a body of work of maybe 16 or 18 paintings that will be there for, I don't know, a full year. Then I had one at the Scottsdale Center for the Arts, and the most important was a one-man show at the Phoenix Art Museum. Huge show.
That is truly amazing.
Yeah, and that's something that you didn't even find, did you?
No, I didn't, and
You
I was
didn't.
doing my research
Yeah.
on you too.
Yeah, but it happened within, let's see, we arrived in 1971. I think that show went on in 73,
Okay.
maybe 72. They were very interested in having an exhibition of mine.
How did you end up in Arizona?
We were visiting friends, the Marshalls, Nat and Gloria, dear friends who had been neighbors of ours back in Chappaqua. We fell in love with what we saw and the lifestyle and the ease of it. I had been in Manhattan now working for about almost 20 years, and Louise was fed up with the snow and the gray winters, and so we decided it would be a good time to change everything.
I could identify with that coming
Yeah.
from Chicago.
Yeah, oh right, and we lived in Chicago
That's
for a
right.
while.
Another effort that you have in your work in the Valley deals with stained glass windows.
Yes,
There's a Presbyterian church, I believe that's the church that
Valley
you
Presbyterian Church. It's on Quail Run and McDonald, and it's right in the heart of Scottsdale, or Paradise Valley, I guess. But anyway, it is a chapel that had not been built when I was asked by the minister if I would consider doing the glass for this new chapel that we had planned to build. And I thought about it for a while and decided, yes, that would be a wonderful challenge. And Louise urged me to do it as well. So we decided to do it. And Louise and I collaborated on ideas, and we made a trip around the world. We happened to be, I had a show in Japan, in Tokyo, that was planned, and so we were going to Tokyo, and we decided that we would continue on around the world and end up in New York and fly then home, and look at basilicas and cathedrals and temples and mosques, any place we could see stained glass. And we saw a lot of it, and it was very inspirational.
Now that particular one, the astronaut from the Challenger, the disaster, his wife came here, and I believe she saw that window, didn't she?
Yes, June Scobie, and you should ask Louise about that when you talk to her later today. June Scobie is the widow of Dick Scobie, who was the commander of the Challenger shuttle that exploded and killed 7 astronauts, including the teacher, Krista McCall, if you recall, and of course the others. June has seen that, and she has even picked out a star in that firmament, which is really what the windows are. It's 160 feet in circumference and 10 feet high, and roughly 30,000 pieces of glass. That is the universe, and it's a unique title. Light of the Universe is the title. And that light can be Christ, if you're a Christian, but if you're not a Christian, it can be the sun. and the brilliant rays of the sun that are horizontally around that room. And we wanted that chapel to be comfortable for people from any background, including atheists and Muslims and anybody. It's the universe, it's stars, it's star streams.
That must have meant something to June when she saw that.
Yes, it did.
So what are you working on now? Can you tell us, or is it a secret?
I'll tell you that my collection has finally found a home.
It has.
We think, and there will be an announcement very soon. In the next month or two, it could drag out to 3, but there will be an announcement about this.
That's very exciting
large
for you.
collection of my work.
Well, let's take a look at some of your work.
Okay.
All right, this is one of your floating cities.
Yes.
Let's start in that corner there, and let's move across this city. What would you like to point out?
Well, it's a figment of my imagination, first of all.
Okay.
It's a technology that doesn't exist. We have this transportation center, or maybe it's an incredible resort, like the Phoenician.
Oh, I like that.
And that dome up there houses maybe a fun center with maybe they have football games up there or all kinds of possibilities there. Coming out of the top of it, as you can see, there is a vehicle that is on its way someplace.
And what is that one to the right?
And the one to the right, up above, even higher, is just an imaginary vehicle of the future.
Okay, so that's not another little city up there.
No, well, it's pretty big because it's behind this, and it's up there rather high, but it isn't important that I define it.
It's just there.
But it's there, and it's provocative.
It certainly
is.
is.
It's intriguing.
Now,
And
these little pod things that are coming out of the city.
yeah, they're coming from that docking port up there. And if you look, you'll see that there are others like that with those legs that come down. And there are little people up there, too. You get a sense of the scale of this vast complex.
Huge.
And these vehicles have come out, and here are a couple that are in the process of retracting their landing gear. And here's one that's fully retracted, and it's on its way
And you can see
somewhere.
the little people in there.
Yes.
And a couple of them are even pointing to things that they're looking at.
Yeah.
Now, they're coming out, and what about this ship?
Well, this is another kind of futuristic
Cruise ship.
seagoing cruise ship. It's exactly what it is.
I think I
It's
would
a
like to
cruise
be
ship.
on that.
It's vast, it's huge, and and then here is another vehicle that probably in the same class as this, but a little different design. And over here is still another. And so let me tell you that doing this kind of thing is a lot of fun, as you might guess.
Oh, I'm sure it would
Because
be.
I think about what would add to this picture. I want it to be rich in detail, lots of interesting
Well, it
stuff happening.
pulls the viewer in immediately. The
Yeah.
colors you've chosen, the scale of things. Here it looks like there's some kind of park that people are enjoying,
Yes.
some outdoor activities. And all these little guys over here that are flying up
Yep.
to join their friends for some reception of
Right,
some sort.
yes.
Now, these people are on Earth.
Yeah,
Is
they're
that
on
correct?
Earth, and they are tourists or whatever. Here, however, are some other men in outfits that suggest that they are from this group.
Right.
And they can lift off and fly wherever they please. These are just tourists that are watching the action down here. And then some up on that promontory with the tree.
But none of them seem to be afraid of one another, so they're
Oh,
all
no.
cohabitating and
And this is a
enjoying
happy
life.
scene.
It is happy.
And the idea is to make it seductive, make it look like a place you'd like to visit. Wouldn't it be fun to be on that promontory looking at that scene in the distance with the research center on the mountaintop over there and these vast buildings, awesome in their size because they're behind the clouds. And so they must be miles high, not just so many 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet, but taller than any building ever thought
There's a
of.
certain spirituality to this, though, too. And I think it's those rays coming from the sun, the way you have them kind of coming. And tying this all together, that we're all part of this universe.
Now let me tell you about this painting. This painting was on loan to Washington, to the Rayburn Building, which is on Capitol Hill. It's one of the great buildings where our senators and congressmen meet to consider science, space, and technology. It was in the boardroom where that kind of decision-making is done. And we had a reception, and this was unveiled, and John Kyle was there, and other dignitaries.
Now, did you talk about the painting, or did people just, were just in awe as they looked at it?
I talked about it.
But the painting speaks for itself, really.
Well, it kind of has to, yeah.
And the American flag that is not quite in the center, you know, but it just kind of pulls you all in here.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep on going. Now, this is on Earth as well, right?
Sure, of course. And that's a futuristic city.
Okay.
And here is on the desert, outside of the outskirts of the city, is a launching facility for craft that are on their way to distant planets.
And there's a little tiny craft that's going somewhere.
Yeah, it's just been launched. Here's the explosion of the smoke and so forth, and there's the launch tower, and it's on its way. And
what is this, the blue that we're seeing, not the sky, but there's a city again of some sort?
That's the building that I was talking about.
Okay.
That is behind the clouds, behind this mountain. So it's enormous. So is that docking port. So are these vehicles. And this is one that I made as bizarre as I could. I mean, it's unlike any spacecraft that I'm familiar with. This is to show that planet Earth still produces...
it looks like a farm of some sort.
It's a farm, yes. And it's still rich with that kind of produce.
Well, let's now move to one of your pieces that you did for Tora, Tora, Tora.
Okay, that's good.
We're now looking at a piece that is for part of Tora, Tora, Tora. There are 3 paintings that you did for that.
Yes.
And this is one of the 3.
One of the 3 large oil paintings that I did for that film. The other 2 are in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington and have been since it opened in '76.
So that's about 30 years now.
Yes, 30 years ago.
So we're looking at an actual scene, and you saw this taking place.
I was in Japan when, and in Hawaii. This was filmed in Hawaii, this portion of it. And yes, I was there. I saw this happen, and it was an incredible experience because I had not been this close to the filming of an action film before. So it was a new experience.
Now, do they have to do, stop, take 1, take 2, take 3, and let's fire up again?
Yeah, fire up again. And what amazed me was how quickly an explosion of this magnitude could dissipate and disappear. It's caught on film, and then it disappears, and a crew goes in and suppresses any fires that might have been caused by it and places a new device, and they can do the whole thing again. These planes would have to go around
and come back. And look at the number of planes that are here.
Yeah, that's exaggerated from the real number but they had about 30 aircraft flying from an airfield nearby.
So you were able to take a few liberties here.
Oh, all kinds of liberties.
Okay.
Yeah, to make it just as dramatic and as I could possibly do.
And that's one of the wonderful things about being an artist and a painter. Yeah. It's your imagination and your interpretation of what you were seeing.
You know, I've often thought, I am fortunate to be an artist who can be the director, the actor, the only talent involved. And I don't have to go to anybody for...
And answer to anybody.
No, I don't have to answer to anybody. And so everything is my responsibility. So if it's good, that's great. If it's not, then I'm the one that's...
Unlike a journalist who has to take the middle of the road, you get to put in all the passion and the emotion and have it work.
Yeah.
Now, did you do any changes on this piece as you were working on it, or even after it was finished?
Yes, actually there was. I had a body, a man that had been hit and died, and he was dead and sprawled out in this little area of the painting.
This area is here?
Yeah, and I think his clothes were even on fire from the recent. He was
that was
hit,
pretty dramatic.
and it was dramatic, and it was a kind of an exciting addition. But when Louise saw it, and Louise is my critic, and she felt that it not only made it a little more gruesome which we didn't. I wanted it to be a beautiful picture as well as a
Right.
very violent action. But anyway, I took out that figure, and I'm glad I did. I just painted it out and didn't put another one in.
And looking at it from artistically, I think you needed that little quiet area here
I think you're right.
to have this whole explosion
Yeah.
take place.
Uh-huh.
So let's talk about some of the people who are in here. These men are running away here. There's
Yeah,
somebody going towards the plane.
This is a pilot that's on his way to his aircraft. Here's one is quickly getting into his parachute and his other gear, and his crew chief who is helping him into the cockpit. And this actually happened when the Japanese attacked this area, and there were these aircraft on the line, and they rushed out and climbed in and took off as rapidly as possible to fight these Japanese aircraft that were in the sky. And there were some dogfights, and we shot some down.
Now, these were real planes in the film.
Those were real aircraft.
How about these?
These were all simulated. They were fiberglass, and they were so realistic. The color was so real. Even these wheels are fiberglass, so that there's no rubber tire
These planes
there.
went nowhere.
And they went nowhere. But they were destroyed in some of the filming. And so they blew apart. And when they blew apart, and one of the criticisms I have of the film, I love the film basically, but you could see that there was no engine there. It was a shell. And you had to look quick. And they were aware that that happened too, obviously, when they edited the film, but it was so immediate and so subliminal that
And
a lot of people
everybody's
wouldn't
so
have
involved in the
noticed. Yeah.
storyline that they miss it. But you know, the next time I watch Tora Tora,
Look for that.
I'm going to look for that. And I do believe it airs every December.
Oh, yeah. Many times every December.
Well, that's one of the things I'll do.
But that was an incredible experience. And I was in Japan as well as in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor, where this really occurred. And it was amazing that, oh, by the way, it was the second highest cost on a film ever made by Hollywood. It was the number one film at that time was Cleopatra,
Okay.
which I think was 30 million. This was like 28 million to do.
Costs have certainly escalated since then.
Escalated, yes.
Well,
indeed.
Bob, we have to thank you so much for joining us on Scottsdale Artbeat. It's been fascinating. It's been wonderful.
Oh, well, I've
and
enjoyed
thank you
it.
for sharing.
I've enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it.
I certainly did, and I know our viewers did too. Thank you all for joining us today on Scottsdale Artbeat. I'm Diane Bykowski, and remember, keep art alive.
There you go.
Do you have a passion for art, a love of museums, an interest in people? Then consider becoming an art docent. The Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art is offering you the opportunity to become part of a dynamic team of volunteers who offer guided tours. As a docent at SMoCA, our exhibits will allow you to connect with classic modern artists such as Ansel Adams and Andy Warhol, as well as with some of the most current cutting-edge artists of our time. Facilitating a connection between the art and the visitor is one of the most exhilarating experiences a docent can have. You don't have to have an art background to become a docent, just a desire to learn. Our extensive training program will enable you to guide tours with confidence.